Welcome back to Dark Horse Auto and Diesel. In this video I'm going to show you how to rebuild the stock turbo on a late 99 to 2003 Ford Super Duty with a 7.3 Power Stroke in it. And while I'm here, I'm going to be doing a few upgrades as well. You don't have to do these, but some of it I would recommend. I'm going to be getting rid of the exhaust back pressure valve there at the high flow outlet here. There's my rebuild kit. And I'm also going to be adding in Riff Raff's version of a billet wheel. So eventually I'll probably do a little review on this guy here, and hopefully it works out good for me. I've been getting a lot of turbo surge when I tow. It's my work truck. So enough yakking, let's get to work here. So the first thing I like to do is to remove the wastegate actuator here, this piece. And so you're going to take a small screwdriver and pop this little clip out of here. Or break it. And then remove these two nuts here. Those are both 10 millimeter. There we go. Just take that and set it off to the side. The next step is to remove the exhaust back pressure valve housing. There's 7 bolts. These are all 8 millimeter 12 point, and you may want to try soaking these in some penetrating oil ahead of time. What I usually do is, I'll get a regular box end wrench, 12 point, and then use a dead blow hammer or a soft mallet on my wrench to break the torque on them. Now if you have a 8 millimeter 12 point socket or a ratcheting wrench, it just makes them a little quicker to get them the rest of the way off. These bolts are not, they're all the same, so there's no particular place they need to be in. When you reassemble, they can just go back in whatever hole you want to put them in. Sometimes they just come right off like mine just did there. Other times you might need to tap on it with a soft mallet like my dead blow hammer here. Obviously you don't want to use a hard hammer. Alright, and that just lifts off. Set that aside, or if you're like me, you're just removing that problematic piece of crap. So at this point I like to take this thing here and throw it in my scrap bucket. I imagine most of you are probably already aware of this, but that piece that I just threw away with the exhaust back pressure valve, the purpose of that valve is basically just for warm-up. It serves no real functional purpose for the truck. I like to get rid of it because with the pedestal and everything, there's an oil actuated solenoid in there, and it's just a leak point in my opinion, and I don't let my truck sit and get up to operating temperature idling before I start driving it. It's unnecessary. It's a waste of fuel. Just start it up, let it sit for a minute, and just drive easy. The back pressure valve is really useless in my opinion. All it does is just cause a restriction in your exhaust. If you're doing a turbo rebuild here and you're doing it the same way that I am, I would recommend, since you have the turbo out, it's super easy to pull the pedestal out and just buy one of these. It's just a delete pedestal. I think I paid, what was it, $70 for it. No chance of oil leaks from the valve or anything like that. And it's quicker, easier, and more foolproof than doing the DIY route where tap threads into the pedestal and put a plug in and all that. I recommend just going this route. It's foolproof. You can't really screw that up. Next step is going to be to remove the compressor housing. Same deal as on the back side there. 8 millimeter 12 point. There's just 5 bolts. Alright, now's the part where you're going to want to start being real careful. If you plan on reusing your wheel that's already in there, you definitely want to make sure you don't damage it in the process here. So you just take and lightly tap on this, and it comes off. And there's that. One thing I'd like to make a note of right now too is when you take this compressor housing off, you'll probably notice that there's oil and stuff pooled up in here and, you know, black greasy stuff all over. That is completely normal. It's because of the way the PCV system routes back into the intake. And this is a good time too to take a look at your turbo fins. Basically, it'll show you how good your air filtration system's working. If these blades are all worn down on the edges and stuff, it means you're getting dirt going past your air filter, and you're going to want to look into that, because what you see here is going to be kind of an indication of what's going on with your cylinder walls and piston rings. Mine looks really good here, and as far as I know, this is the factory turbo with 400 and almost 440,000 miles on it. So thankfully this truck has been well taken care of its whole life. So the next thing you're going to want to do is to remove the compressor wheel. As you can see, I've already got some vice grips locked onto the turbine wheel here. You don't need to put a whole lot of pressure on it. You don't want to damage it. That's just to hold it in place. And then you'll take a 16mm wrench on this, and depending on how tight it is, may need to use a screwdriver and the pliers to help hold it. And you can just thread it off of here once you get it loose enough. And watch your fingers, because these can be pretty sharp if your wheel's still in good shape like mine is. Alright. Next, you're going to want to remove these 4 bolts that hold the compressor housing on. Those are 8mm as well. This is where having a socket's going to be handy, because getting a wrench in there is going to be pretty difficult. Definitely be careful not to damage your turbo shaft here. And then next we're going to remove the backing plate for the compressor wheel. Sometimes it takes a little bit of persuasion. Gently, of course, because this is aluminum, obviously. Sometimes some gentle, keyword gentle, prying action is needed to pop this loose. I like to wrap a rag around it just to help reduce the stress on the aluminum parts, keep from gouging it. As you're pulling this off, pay attention. Sometimes some of these pieces in here will come off with it, and you just need to make sure that you pay attention to the orientation of them as you pull it apart. Next, you need to remove the center section here from the turbine housing. This is where a 1/4 inch drive 8mm 12-point socket comes in real handy, so that you can actually get down into these tiny little holes here to get down onto it. If you are real careful, like I had to be because my socket's missing, you can get a wrench on here. Just make sure you get it down on there as far as you possibly can, and hope and pray that it doesn't round off. These ones tend to be pretty stuck on there. So if you are planning on doing this, I would recommend making sure you have a 12-point 8mm 1/4 inch drive socket on hand, or take your chances. Up to you. As far as I know, most of the rebuild kits provide new bolts for this part. I know the kit that I got does. I got that from Riff-Raff Performance. I know I've mentioned Riff-Raff in this video already a couple of times. I'd just like to mention that I'm not paid by them. They didn't ask me to do this video or anything like that. It's just, I've done business with them before. I like the way they do business, and so far from everything I've gotten with them, they sell good quality parts and good customer service. So just a customer review, not a paid review, or they didn't pay me to advertise or anything like that. I just like doing business with them. Alright, once you've got those 4 bolts out, you can separate these 2 pieces here. Which this one usually takes some persuasion as well due to all the rust. So as you can see, sometimes they are a little bit more difficult than what you anticipate, and have to use some somewhat unorthodox methods to get it loose. Definitely be extremely careful if you have to resort to doing it this way. Alright, it's finally coming loose. I'm not actually driving this into the seal area. I'm just kind of trying to gently wedge it in between the 2 pieces here, and it's, you know, going past that. It's definitely not an ideal way to do this, but sometimes you have no choice. That's loose. Carefully pull this out so you don't damage your turbine wheel, and you're left with that. So next we can start disassembling the center housing here, and you're going to want to make note of the orientation of everything in here. So as I said before, your thrust bearing and all that may have already come off when you lifted the compressor housing off. If not, then you remove it now. This is a little 2-piece deal here, lifts off together. Now on reassembly it's going to be slightly different because I'm using the 360-degree thrust bearing rebuild kit, but we'll go over the differences for that later. You may need to very gently tap on the end of this. And in my situation here, I'm not reusing this compressor wheel. So to avoid boogering up my threads on that, I'll thread that on and lightly tap on the compressor wheel rather than directly on the end of the shaft. Make sure it doesn't smash your finger. And don't cut yourself either. Try to make sure all the pieces come out with it. You should have something that looks about like this. So now at this point you can just take all of this stuff off the turbine wheel. And right in here is an oil seal that you need to remove. This oil seal ring can be slightly difficult to remove sometimes. You just want to be careful with it so you don't damage the shaft in here. Some different picks may be handy for this part, just to try to get underneath it and just kind of pop it out of there a little bit. And just kind of work your way around. Kind of get the one side lifted up over the lip. Like so. Focus. And then you can just kind of work your way around gently. Alright, then once you get all that off, take some time and you'll see a bunch of coked up oil and stuff on there. You want to clean all that off. You can gently scrape some of it off and use a scuff pad or something to do the final clean on it. And brake cleaner or carb cleaner will help here too. Here, so you're going to want to make sure that this area here is very clean if you don't worry about the rest of it, but definitely this area around here and a little bit inside of it. So you can use a wire brush, screwdriver carefully, just be gentle when you're cleaning it up. You don't want to gouge the metal. And try to keep as much as you can from going down inside the center cartridge. We will be cleaning it out, but the less stuff that's in there is obviously the less chance of stuff getting left behind during the final cleaning. Once you get most of the big stuff off of there, you can come through here with a mild scuff pad, and then most of what you're cleaning off of here is just diesel soot. And you're going to want to clean down along this bottom ridge here too, because that's where it does actually seal up with the turbine housing. Be a little nicer on it on this part here, because this is where the oil ring actually seals up at. And now that it's cleaned up, you can see that it's kind of tapered. And what happens, that's why you had to tap the shaft to get it out, because that oil seal ring sits down in there and it's kind of a tight fit. And when you reassemble it, you'll see when we get there, but when you push everything back together, it'll kind of ride into this tapered area and you'll feel it snap in. But you just want to make sure everything's clean. All of the burnt oil and diesel soot and stuff is out of this area so that you get a good seal and you don't have a leak and doing this job for nothing. Alright, you're also going to want to flip it over to this side here, clean up where the little gasket goes in here, a little O-ring thing, and also just kind of clean up some of the rust along this area in here so everything seals up better. And you can also clean up this a little bit here too. So now at this point, with clean hands, or reasonably clean hands, go ahead and open up your rebuild kit and make sure all the stuff is there. You should have this big O-ring here that goes around the compressor housing, the little clover leaf looking seal here, and the thrust bearing and pieces with it, your spacer, 2 oil seal rings, and 2 journal bearings. And at this point right now, you should have a little container of clean oil, and you'll take these journal bearings, drop them down in there, let them soak for a little bit. I like to soak this piece too, because why not? Really, you can pretty much just throw everything in here if your container is big enough. All that stuff is soaking in the oil. Now we can go ahead and make sure that our center section and our turbine wheel and shaft assembly are pretty much operating room clean. Next we can put our oil seal onto the turbine and shaft assembly here. It's going to be the larger of the two rings here. And I like to coat it with a little bit of oil just to help get it on there a little easier. And when you're putting this on, you want to make sure you don't stretch it too far. Just kind of get it on there and work it around gently. Sometimes easier said than done. Feel it snap into place. And that's on. It's a good idea too to take your center cartridge here and take some compressed air to it, just to make sure that any extra debris is out of it, and also to dry up any solvent that you used to clean it out. So the next thing you're going to do is get your bearings out of the oil bath here. And a little bit of oil you have left on your fingers here, you can just kind of wipe all over this to make sure that everything's nice and lubed up. And then you'll take your bearings and the spacer and install them. Grab your center section, grab your little cup thingy here. Go ahead and just pop that on there. And then grab this and carefully slide it in there. And then once you get to a certain point, you feel a little bit of resistance right there, and then it'll just pop in like that. I don't know if you can see it, but you'll feel it actually snap in. That's when that oil seal pops into its groove. Alright, now at this point we can install the center section back onto the turbine housing. And it only goes one way, so carefully drop that down in there. And this is where, like I said, the rebuild kit comes with new bolts. This is where you're going to want to put the new bolts in at. And they're supposed to be torqued to get these bolts snugged down a little bit. And probably shouldn't have to tell you this, but make sure that that area there on the turbine housing is also clean. Get rid of some of the rust on that. And you're going to want to snug these down in a cross pattern. And you're going to also want to make sure that you verify that the journal bearing's in the right position. It'll look like that. If it doesn't look like that, you screwed up somewhere. Next, you want to clean up your compressor back plate. I'm not going to walk you through the process of that because it's pretty self-explanatory. Go ahead and remove the O-ring that goes in that groove there. Rebuild kit comes with one. You might as well use it. And just make sure everything's nice and clean. Your bearing area back here, make sure that's nice and clean. Next, you're going to take and install the little oil seal onto this piece here. And it's just like the other one, just be careful with it. Kind of work it on there. And it'll slide down in there. Alright, now we can take these pieces and install them into the backing plate. So first you'll take the, whatever you call this, the seal. It's got the seal on it. You take that and it goes this way, and then just push on it. You'll feel it snap into place. In this piece here, the actual thrust bearing, you need to make sure the oil grooves are facing towards the center section. So it needs to be facing up like this, and this thing only goes in one direction. And there it is. One only goes one way. You really can't screw it up unless you have it flipped the other way around. That'll cause major issues. Actually, I don't even know if it goes the other way. Let's see. I mean, you could probably make it go in that way, but don't try. And then you'll take this little guy here, and it just kind of sits around in there. The oil will help hold it together during assembly. Then next we grab the little clover leaf looking seal here and just kind of work that into the groove there. And next we're going to install this backing plate back onto the center section. It only goes on one way, but in order to keep everything aligned as you're assembling it, so you don't have to spin it around or anything, the blank part of that bearing goes towards the bottom of the center section. And I've got it hanging over the edge of the workbench here, so I don't have to worry about this crap falling out on me. So let's take it and carefully slide it up on there, and then grab a bolt. Get it started. That'll hold everything together. Get the other three started. Once you get those 4 bolts hand snug, you can flip everything up and it'll hold everything together for you. Then you can just come around and just get these kind of snugged up a little bit before you torque them down. Try to tighten it evenly, obviously. Then you'll torque it to 15 to 17 foot-pounds in a cross pattern, obviously. And just go back through and check them again. Alright, thanks, woman. Now go get me a beer and make me a sandwich.
Fuck you.
Alright, now you can go ahead and install your new O-ring that goes around here. Okay, so just kind of work it in there. Much easier with both hands. There you go. Now we'll get our compressor wheel. So as I stated earlier in the video, I'm replacing the compressor wheel, upgrading it while I'm at it here. If you're familiar with these, this is the factory style turbo wheel on the late 99 trucks. They're a bit quieter than the OBS and early 99 style, but they have a large problem with turbo surge under heavy load, especially when you're towing. More pronounced when you have an aftermarket intake. So I'm upgrading to this beautiful piece here. It's almost too pretty to put back in there and hide. But what this should do, like I said, it's kind of Riff Raff's version of the Wicked Wheel 2, whatever. We're going to try it out and see how well it works. Hopefully it solves my turbo surge issues, and hopefully it isn't too ridiculously loud because it is my work truck. spend a lot of time in it. So just lightly thread that on. You really don't need to torque it down. I would just snug it up a little bit, because the design of it, when the turbo is actually spinning, it spins this direction. So it's just going to naturally want to tighten itself up. So with this wheel, it is 13 millimeter instead of the 16 on the factory. Which the idea of that is you have a little bit smaller area here and more fins to actually grab more air. This wheel is supposed to provide a little bit better boost at low RPM and also eliminate surge. It's supposed to provide more boost across the entire RPM range, the way I understand it. We'll find out in a week or so when I get the motor back in my truck. Next, we will take our clean compressor housing, get that put on here. It only goes one way, just like pretty much everything else on here. Get our bolts started by hand, like always. And these ones get torqued down to 15 to 17 foot-pounds as well, just like the other ones. Working a cross pattern so everything gets worked down evenly so you don't damage your gasket. Next, we'll install the wastegate housing. In this case, back pressure delete housing as well. And then torque them down to, can you guess what? If you guess anything other than 15 to 17 foot-pounds, you lose. Alright, and then the last step here is to reinstall your wastegate actuator. Which, like I said, I'm putting a different one on mine. Let's get it slid in there. Pull that until it goes over. And then get your nuts installed. There is actually a torque spec for these, 50 to 70 inch-pounds. Had to look that up. I'm not actually going to torque these because it's not really that critical. Just don't break it. And then your little E-clip here. And it just slides over. And just, you know, snug it up. Doesn't need a whole lot. Alright, job's done. What I like to do too at the end here, flip it over, and you know, the little cup of oil that we soaked our bearings and stuff in, I like to just dump some of the oil down into the holes here to make sure everything's good and lubed up for startup. It'll make a mess when you flip it back over, but just be prepared for that. Yeah. Spin a little bit, get that oil worked around in there, and good to go. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this helped you.